What was that beep? Don't just hear a beep. That was. Okay, so this chapter, again, we're learning about both human resource management and labor relations. When I say labor, what am I talking about? Remember, labor? Unions, okay? Labor is a fancy word for unions. And so we looked at the human resource management process as a whole. Whatever the human resources department does should support the overall strategy of the organization, right? And there's a lot that HR does. We talked about, well, we'll go through these individually, but this breaks down all the different steps that hopefully will lead to the desired outcomes. And the desired outcomes are that you have the right people in the right jobs doing the right things for the organization, right? That's really the goal of HR. And that you're not getting sued for discrimination or any other kind of employment issues. So we talked about how you need to analyze and figure out what are the jobs that you need done. For each job, you'll have a job description that lays out the details of what's expected in that job so that it's clearly communicated to the candidates. Now, companies are not always good at following this. My son, for example, was complaining to me recently that he's being asked or told to do all these things that are not part of his job. And I said, well, what does your job description say? And he said, I don't have a job description. They never came up with one. That's not good. You know, if the company does not clearly document what is expected in each job, how can they evaluate the person's performance when they have not even specified what they're supposed to do? And so that opens up the company to potential lawsuits where the employee says, I was hired to do this, but I'm being told to do that, right? So the company really needs to have it clearly documented, and then they need to follow whatever they said. And they need to specify what are the qualifications for each job, so that if they don't hire somebody because they weren't qualified, they can point to the qualifications and say, this person did not meet the qualifications, right? If they haven't specified what the qualifications are, how are they going to justify not hiring that person?
So if it's like the same situation, but it's like you're already hired, or like someone's already hired,
Okay.
And they either fired them or like
Could be, yeah. If the company disciplines or fires somebody in any way, they really need to have a clear documented reason for doing it. Because if that person challenges them, makes a complaint to the labor board, or makes a complaint in court, they're gonna have to defend themselves, which requires lawyers and it requires money. And companies don't want to have to deal with that, right? So the best way to prevent those kind of situations is to be clear up front on what the expectations are of the job. And then as you're evaluating someone's performance, letting them know this is where you're meeting expectations. This is where you're not meeting expectations. This is what you need to do in order to get up to expectations. If you don't follow those kind of steps, you just fire somebody and say, hey, we don't want you here anymore, without being able to show that you communicated to that person what they were doing wrong and how they could fix it, they can come back and say, hey, that was not fair. It was wrongful termination. I'm going to sue. So as I mentioned, a big part of HR is protecting the company legally. All right, and then the company has to look at how many people they have working and how many people they think they'll need in different jobs. And then figure out, do we have too many people, not enough people, or like Goldilocks, just the right amount, right? Which usually is not the case. Usually you have either too many or not enough. So we talked about what are some strategies if you have a shortage to get more people, or at least more hours worked. And if you have too many people, what are some things you could do? All right, so that's all part of HR. We talked about how sometimes you promote from within and sometimes you hire people from outside the company. You can recruit from many different methods: online, referrals, job fairs. even newspaper ads sometimes still. And you want to create a brand for your company, just like you have a brand for selling your products, so people know what your products are all about. You want to have a brand as an employer, so that people looking for jobs will think about coming to work for you because of the brand image that you've created. Then we looked at the multiple steps that are involved in the recruiting and selection process, and how you start with a big funnel of applicants. I've heard of cases, not recently, but in the past, when the job market was really well. Like after, for example, after the 2008 financial crash, a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people were out looking for work. And I heard about job openings where they would get hundreds, or in some cases, thousands of people applying for one job. So you start off with this huge pool of applicants in that case. And you can't interview all those people, right? You can't do background checks on all those people. So you have to narrow it down. You screen out the ones that are definitely not a fit. You start doing some interviews, screen it down some more. Maybe you do some other tests, some background checks or whatever, and you get it down to a handful of candidates that you can reasonably select from, right? That's the role of the recruiters, to find the needle in the haystack. When you're looking through all these resumes, you think, oh, these people, you know, here are 100 resumes, they all look pretty good. Well, when you dig deeper, you find some of them are better than others. So finding the ones that are really the best candidates is really tricky, especially because people applying for jobs don't always tell the truth, right? Sometimes they lie on their resume about their degree, about their work experience, about their age. People lie about all kinds of things. And then they'll lie in interviews too, right? So how do you sift through that and figure out who's really the best candidate? We talked a little bit about interviews and how interviewers will often ask questions designed to get beyond just fluffy answers and try to get down to real examples of what you've done in the past. So be prepared if you're going in for an interview. As I said, you might want to role play, practice with somebody, have them ask you some tough interview questions, but be prepared to give stories. Have a story about great customer service you provided, about a creative solution to a problem you came up with. Have those stories ready so you can weave them into your answers and impress the interviewer, right? And there are all kinds of things that you want to do in an interview. You generally want to look the person in the eye. You generally want to shake their hand. You want to dress professionally, right? And if you need any help preparing for an interview, our career center here, if you don't know where it is, it's in the library, the A building. It's upstairs, all the way in the back. There's a career center. They can help you make a resume. They can help you role play interviews, all that kind of thing. Help you make a cover letter. Okay. Well, I'll mention also, if you're not aware, we have this great program called Job Speaker. So when you go into Duo or MyHeartNow, it's one of the options you have on there. Check out Job Speaker. It's got thousands of job opportunities, and some of them are specifically looking for Hartnell students. If you're in the job market, that's a good place to start, Job Speaker. And then the recruiters have to keep track of all the different candidates and figure out, because you can't remember everything every candidate said, right? So you have to take notes. You have to use some sort of system to compare and then select the best candidates. We talked about training, how important it is to have an effective training program so every employee knows how to do their job. And then ongoing things like safety training and train people to appreciate diversity, train people to not harass each other in the workplace. These are all kinds of things that HR is often responsible for. We looked at some different approaches to training. I talked a little bit about how some employees get developed, the ones that have potential to do more than their current job. Well, you might want to provide extra development to those employees and help prepare them to move up. And that's as far as we got. I don't think we covered this slide, so we'll start here, but I know that was a lot. Any questions anybody has, any comments on anything? No? Okay. All right, well, another part of HR is making sure that employees are evaluated properly. I think I mentioned on Tuesday that it's a collaboration. Everything HR does, they do it in collaboration with management to some degree. So for example, who evaluates to make sure the employees are meeting expectations? It's usually the supervisor of the employee that does that, right? HR is too busy to evaluate every employee. But when the manager does that evaluation, they follow the guidelines set out by HR, by the Human Resources Department. So for example, let's say Andrew here is a worker and I am the supervisor. I need to know what are the standards that Andrew is supposed to follow? What are the expectations? Remember the job description where it says exactly what the job is about? So I need to evaluate his performance based on that. And then of course I would find Andrew is exceeding expectations. That's great. And then maybe at an annual review, which a lot of companies do, at that annual review where I sit down with Andrew and I go over his past year's performance and I tell him, hey, you're exceeding all these expectations. Maybe I can say, and that's why we are giving you a raise. Because you're doing such a good job. But let's say I've got another employee who is slacking off. They're not meeting expectations. And I give them the same raise. Is that fair? No. And it would probably be a violation of HR policy. Because HR wants to make sure we're consistent. Not that we treat everybody the same, but we treat everybody fairly, right? So if you've got an employee getting rewarded for exceeding expectations, and you've got another employee not even meeting expectations, well, that employee that's not meeting expectations shouldn't get the same raise. Maybe they shouldn't get a raise at all, or at least not a very big one. And maybe I need to work with that employee to try to get them to where they are meeting the expectations, right? Because ultimately it comes back on me. If I'm the supervisor and my people are not doing what they're supposed to do, I'm not doing a very good job supervising, right? So you have to know what the standards and expectations are. You observe the employee's work, evaluate how are they doing, and then you either reward them for doing a good job, or maybe some kind of change. Maybe you say, you know, this is not really the right department for you. Maybe let's have you work in this other department. Or maybe, no, I don't think this is the right company for you. Let's try to find another company you can go work for, which unfortunately I have had to say to workers in the past that you know, this isn't the right place for you. So again, supervisors, they need to be fair, be consistent. They need to follow company policy. And sometimes they need to do the difficult work of telling people that, you know, it's just not working out. It's kind of like a breakup, you know, saying, sorry, this just isn't going the right way here.
Wow.
What's that?
Yeah, if it don't go well, could be a foul.
Could be a foul. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So as you're evaluating employees, different companies have different ways of doing this. But here are some examples, because again, everything you want to have documented. Why do you think you want to document your evaluation of the employee? You're going to, for example, not give the employee a raise, or you're going to fire the employee. When might that documentation come in handy?
Proofs showing that they either meet standards or they're falling behind standards.
Okay, yeah, you have some evidence of why you evaluated them the way that you did. And when might you need that evidence? Maybe in court. Maybe when they make a complaint to the state, labor department about how you're not treating them fairly. Want to come in and show the evidence. This is what we talked about. This is why they didn't get a raise. So when you're evaluating employees, one way to do it is to use a scale. So for everything you're evaluating them on, like this employee's being evaluated on, did they answer phone calls by the second ring? And then we have a scale of 1 to 5, probably 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. So that's one way you can evaluate on a scale like that. You could have a checklist. Did they do this? Did they do that? You just check it off if they did it. You might use a narrative approach where you have to actually write out in words what the employee did. That takes longer. It's more detailed, but it is time consuming. You might also have a list that shows did they meet expectations or not. You might also have it tied into goals that the employee had. Did they meet certain goals or not? A lot of companies during the performance reviews, which are typically annually, but I think it's a good idea to do them maybe every month, maybe every 3 months. I think the more often employees are getting feedback, the better. They shouldn't have to wait a whole year, to find out if they're doing a good job, at least not officially. But what a lot of companies do is something called management by objectives. They have the employees set goals or objectives for themselves together with the supervisor. In the past, when I was a manager and I had to sit down and do a performance review with an employee, I knew what I thought about the employee's performance, but instead of telling them what I thought, I would ask them to evaluate their own performance. And I found they were usually harsher on themselves than I would have been on them. And it made it just a lot easier. Because if they have to sit there while I'm telling them, well, you did this, but you didn't do that, it's not a pleasant conversation, right? They feel nervous. On the other hand, if I ask them to evaluate themselves, I found they're a lot more comfortable with that. And they're usually pretty open and honest. So once in a while, I would have to point out something that they didn't mention that was important, but usually they did a pretty good job of evaluating themselves. So if you sit down with your employee, have them tell you what they think their goals should be, they're probably going to be pretty similar to what you would have come up with. So the manager and the employee together set these goals. Maybe the employee says, oh, I'm going to use more open-ended questions when I'm talking to customers, or I'm going to be more creative in how I propose my marketing ideas, whatever it might be. Whatever goals the employee comes up with, then at the next evaluation, or maybe once in a while in between, you check in with the employee and see how's it going. Or do you feel like you're meeting those goals? Because remember, the organization has a strategy, right, that it's working towards. That's supported by the tactical goals, it's supported by the operational goals, that is supported by the employee's own goals. So it all fits together. So performance evaluation is a really important part of management, but it's also part of HR. Management and HR have to work together because HR is going to keep all these records. What if a manager quits? HR has to have all the records of what the employee evaluations were in the employee files. Okay, does anyone have questions or comments on anything at this point? All right, so, usually it is the supervisor that does the evaluation of the employee. Some companies use an approach called a 360-degree review. Anybody heard of that before? When you do a 360-degree, 360 like the whole circle, right? That's what 360 degrees means. It's not just the supervisor's opinion about the employee, but what do their coworkers think about the employee? What do their customers think? And if the employee is a manager and has their own employees reporting to them, what do those direct reports think of the manager? So you're getting a full review from everybody that you interact with, every group in which you interact. Now, what do you think would be the benefit of doing it that way? Of getting all these different people's perspectives.
Yeah.
It's better?
Yeah.
Well, why do you say that, Corinne?
Because you, as a supervisor, you have only your point of view,
Okay.
and you can see how the other people see how you work.
Yeah.
You don't know.
You get a more diverse pool of perspectives,
And you
right?
can see the weakness of your work and start working in that. It is a good job, good work.
Okay, yeah, so you might get information that you as a supervisor wouldn't have seen on your own, other perspectives. Very true. What would be the downside of using this approach?
If sometimes you don't like you, they will back.
Okay, there could be some people that don't like the employee and they use it as an opportunity to try to get them in trouble or something, okay? My mind didn't go there, but yeah, that's an interesting point.
It's true.
You think it might be time consuming too, to get feedback from all these different groups? Right, you'd have to send out a survey or meet with them or something. It would take some time, so. So companies that use this approach, I think they find it useful and worth the extra effort, but it does take extra effort. Okay, let's cover a few more slides. Okay, we'll cover this slide and then we'll do our grow activity. And then after that, we'll start talking about unions. Okay, compensation. How do you figure out, sorry, I'm trying to use my left hand, I'm not very good at it. How do you figure out the right amount to pay your employees? If you started a company and you started hiring some people, how do you figure out how much to pay them?
Take market average.
Okay, take a market average. Tell me more about that, Andrew.
Just, for example, Googling what that particular job description pays out.
Okay, so you can do some research for that job in that geographic area. What is the average pay? What's the high end? What's the low end? It gives you an idea. Same thing like if you set the price on a product. You remember when we looked at the supply and demand curves? And we saw that you can figure out where those meet. But that's not necessarily the price you want to set for your company. Sometimes you want to set a higher price, not sell as many, but make a bigger profit margin. Or sometimes you want to set a lower price, you'll sell more with a smaller profit margin. Well, it's the same thing here. Do you want to be the employer that pays the average? Or do you want to try to attract the best personnel and pay more than the average? Or do you want to pay less than the average and just take whoever you can get, right? It depends on your strategy as a company. But yeah, starting with some research gives you a reference point. Now, there is the direct compensation that people get paid, either an hourly wage typically or a salary, right? Those are the two main ways that people get their main compensation, but there are also benefits. What are some other things that employers can provide that are valuable to employees in exchange for working there? What are some benefits?
Insurance. Health insurance.
Health insurance, okay. What else?
Vacations.
Okay,
pays.
401k, retirement plan, vacation pay. These are all things that, actually the ones that were mentioned are all optional. Employers don't have to offer that, but many of them do because it helps them attract and retain talent. And then there are some required benefits. For example, employers have to contribute to your Social Security and your Medicare and other things that are required.
Workman's comp.
Yeah, workers' compensation is a required thing that employers have to pay for. Unemployment insurance, they have to contribute to as well. That's true. Okay. So it's expensive to hire people.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, the benefits themselves cost 30% or more of the person's salary. So if you've got an employee making, let's say, $50,000 a year, it's probably gonna cost you at least another 15,000 to pay for their benefits. Now it's costing you 65,000 a year. Which means, as an employer, that employee better be bringing in at least $65,000 of profits into your company in order to cover that $65,000 cost, right? Or at least $65,000 of revenue. Now, on average, not every employee is a salesperson that brings in revenue. But employees can be very expensive. So let's work on our grow activity. I will pause the recording here. So get into your groups of 4 or more.
Mm.
So unions are somewhat controversial. Some people love them, some people hate them. Let's look at what they are. You can make your own evaluation of whether unions are a good thing or not. And you'll probably pick up my bias, because I definitely have a bias on this issue. So if you ask unions why employees should join them, why should employees join unions? They will tell you, for one thing, if the employee has a grievance, meaning there's something that they're unhappy about at their employer, they can go to the union and the union will help them get it resolved. That would be one thing. And if you're a union member, it's harder for you to get fired or laid off. So that is also, for the employee, a good thing. You will likely get better benefits as a union member, because the union will bargain on your behalf. They'll bargain on behalf of all of the union members to get better benefits and better pay from the employer. And in many cases, better working conditions. As an example, here at Hartnell College, the faculty were in negotiations last year. In fact, our contract with the district had expired more than a year prior. So we were working without a contract, which is not ideal. You should always have an agreement about pay, about benefits, but the last one expired and we had put forth what we wanted in the new contract. The district had said, no way, we're not going to give you that. And we weren't getting anywhere.
You weren't too happy about it.
We weren't too happy about it. Our negotiating team was very frustrated with the district's negotiating team, and they were very frustrated with
You
us.
guys protested.
We did. We picketed. You might have seen us on campus with picket signs and bullhorns, and we had a whole campaign that lasted for more than a year, about a year and a half. And finally, at some point, something changed. We don't know exactly what happened. My guess is the president of the college might have had something to do with it. I've heard, I shouldn't spread rumors, but I've heard that he encouraged the board to meet our demands, or at least to try to meet our demands. Because all of a sudden, they came back and we thought we were going to have to go on strike. But all of a sudden the board came back and said, okay, we'll give you everything you want. They didn't say it that way, but ultimately that they offered us really all the main things we were asking for. We did feel like because especially inflation has been so high in the last few years, that we should have an appropriate increase in pay to keep up with inflation. And when you compared our salary as Hartnell faculty members with Gavilan, MPC, Cabrillo, all these other local colleges, or Bay Area colleges, other Central Coast colleges, if you looked at about 70 of these colleges, 60 or 70, we were at the bottom. And we thought, this is one of the most expensive places to live. We should at least be in the middle, right? Compared to all of our other local colleges. So we thought we had a pretty good argument that our pay should be higher, that our part-time faculty members should get health insurance because they didn't have it. And part-time faculty members often have to teach for multiple schools just to make a living. So they might teach 1 or 2 classes here, 1 or 2 classes at NBC, 1 or 2 at Cabrillo.
Or 1 or 2 at Gavilan.
Gavilan, so they're driving all over the place, they're teaching online just to try to pay the bills, and they don't have any health insurance. So we thought, oh, and the state of California created a fund to pay for health insurance for part-time faculty members. So it's free to the district. So we said, give them the health insurance and the state's gonna pay for it. We also said the counselors here at Hartnell College and the librarians, they sometimes help students online. And when they work with students online, they should be able to do that from home. Why would they have to come to campus just so that they can work with students online? Doesn't make sense. And the district said, no way, we're not gonna allow that to happen initially. And then what was the 4th thing? There was another, oh yes, the 4th thing, classes that have a lecture and a lab. The lab pay was less than the lecture pay, even though it's often more work. So that didn't make sense. So those were the 4 main things that we wanted. And eventually the district came back and said, okay. After 1.5 years of telling us no, they came back and said, okay. So we were very happy that they finally came to our side. And it was because we, as the Hartnell College Faculty Association Union, organized. That we picketed, we went and talked at the Board of Trustee meetings. We got more faculty members to join the union. We did all this hard work and it paid off. So the union did get us better benefits, better pay, better working conditions. Now, if you ask an employer why it's not necessary for people to join a union, because employers don't want to have to deal with the union. They'd rather have more control, more power. So what the employer will do is they'll tell the workers, if you join the union, you're going to have to pay union dues. And that's true. I can tell you from my experience, it costs us something like, if you're a full-time faculty member, it's something like $100 a month to be a union member. And as a faculty member, you cannot join the union, but you still get the benefits, most of the benefits of being a union member. So that's why some of our faculty members thought, oh, I don't want to join the union. Why should I pay that money? They're already taking care of me. But to me, it seems like you're getting the benefit of being a union member, you should at least pay your dues. And most of the other faculty members would agree with me. So, but there is a cost. It says here $15 to $40, but in some cases it can be more. And let's see, the employer will tell you that we promote people when they do a good job, not when the union says that that person can be promoted. I mean, there's a valid point there. If the employer is really being fair in how it treats its workers, then maybe you don't need a union to represent the workers. But are employers fair? You know, some are, but not all of them. They might tell you, hey, we pay people fairly, we have good benefits. So again, you don't need to join the union because we'll be fair to you. And maybe they will. And they will tell you, hey, we already follow all the safety guidelines. So you already have good working conditions. And it's up to the worker to decide, do I believe that this employer is really taking care of me? Because if I don't, then maybe I do want to join a union and maybe we can negotiate collectively with the employer. So again, it's controversial. You might have heard that sometimes unions protect workers that aren't doing a good job, makes it hard for them to get fired, which is true. Sometimes companies find they can't fire a person because the union's gonna push back too hard. So there are downsides to unions and there are upsides. Anyone have questions, comments, experiences that they want to share? Is anyone here a union member, just out of curiosity? At their job? Okay. This chart over here is kind of interesting. It shows from the 1930s up until about 10 years ago, the percentage of the workforce in the United States that is represented by a union. And you see it was very low back during the Depression, but it really took off. And that's because in 1935, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed into law the Wagner Act, also known as the National Labor Relations Act, that strengthened the right we have as workers to join unions. And so we see this rapid increase in the number of people represented by the unions, almost reaching about, what, 28% or so at the peak of the workforce. But then you see over time, it went down. So now it's pretty low. Not that many people today are covered by unions. Adriana?
Yeah, my mom was part of a union here in California.
Okay.
And she ended up demanding, like, bringing a lawsuit against one of the companies here. And then, like, due to it, there was like a lot of people that joined it. And it was like over $30,000 for each person.
Oh, wow.
But because of that, they ended up, well, obviously not hiring the workers anywhere here in California. So it's kind of like, I feel like that's why sometimes people are scared to join unions, because sometimes even though they win the cases and things like that, because they have such large connections, it's harder for like the people to get find jobs again. Yeah, so that's kind of what happens.
Okay, so I don't know if everyone could hear that.
I've heard stuff on the news before.
Yeah, you'll hear things that have, there's been a lot in the news about unions this past year. There've been a lot of strikes, a lot of actually accomplishments that unions had in multiple industries. Like you might remember the writers, the Hollywood writers were on strike, and the actors, and the who else? The Teamsters, the UPS drivers,
DoorDash.
DoorDash. DoorDash?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking Uber.
Well, yeah, now that's an interesting one because those people are not always employees too. But Adriana's point was that in the example she was aware of with her mom, there was a lawsuit that the union won and the union members got money for it, but then the employers retaliated by then not hiring those folks. So that, you know, there are laws about what employers can do. It sounds like they might have been pushing the boundaries of that law, but then what do? Sue them again, right? Kind of sometimes not worth it. Okay, so thank you for sharing that example. So let's say you worked at a company and you thought, you know, we're not being treated fairly. I want to keep my job here, but I want to be treated fairly, so I want to join a union. And there's not already a union covering your job. Well, what you could do is speak to one of the existing union organizations. For example, I mentioned that I'm part of the Hartnell College Faculty Association. That is the local union, but it's part of a larger union, the California Teachers Association, which is part of a national union that's actually the biggest union in the United States, and that is the National Educators Association. So we are connected to that larger nationwide organization of public teachers and professors. So you would reach out to an organization, a union organization, And what they would do is say, okay, you need to talk to the people at your workplace, the other workers, okay? Managers cannot join the union. And there are some industries, some particular jobs that are not allowed to join the union, but most hourly employees in the United States have the right to join a union. So what you would have to do, go to some of your coworkers that are also hourly employees and say, hey, if you were given the option to vote on whether or not to join the union, would you like to be able to vote? Not would you vote yes or no, but just do you want the opportunity to vote on whether or not to join a union? And if you get enough people willing to sign a card saying, yeah, I'd like to be able to vote yes or no on that, then you take that to the National Labor Relations Board, and that is a federal agency that will then confirm that you meet all the requirements and that you can have an election. And your employer cannot stop you. So then you have that election. Well, before the election, you can try to get more support, get more people to vote yes. Your employer is going to try to get people to vote no. By law, your employer cannot threaten people or fire people because of their involvement in the union. They would get in really big trouble if they did that. But they can try to persuade people and say, you really don't need a union, you don't want to pay the dues. So eventually you have the election. And if enough workers say, yes, we want to be represented by a union, you are. You don't get enough people to say yes, then you're not represented by a union. Okay, that's the way the process works. Questions, comments? Now, once a union has been established, as I mentioned earlier, there is a contract that that both sides have to agree to. And usually that contract lasts for multiple years and it has to continually be renegotiated. So this is how that process works. The two sides come together, the union and the employer, and they both present what they want out of the contract. And usually they want different things, right? So then they're going to negotiate back and forth, and they try to come up with a tentative agreement that both sides are okay with. Once they do come up with that tentative agreement, top management of the company has to approve it. The union members have to approve it. And if that happens, if everybody approves it, or at least the majority, right? If the majority of union members approve it, then you ratify. That contract then goes into effect. But if the union members say, nope, we don't like that deal, they reject it, and they could potentially go on strike. Which means what? What does it mean to go on strike?
No one's gonna work.
Yeah, they stop working. Can you imagine if, and then we seriously thought that we were going to be on strike at some point this spring. And none of us wanted to do that. None of us faculty members wanted that to happen because classes would be canceled for weeks, maybe months. Can you imagine what a mess that would be? You know how that would impact you? Oh, yeah. We did not want that. But we were putting out demands and the board was shooting down everything we wanted. So we were moving towards that process. We went through a mediation process, which means a mediator came in, somebody that would be neutral, would listen to both sides and try to get both sides to come to an agreement. And the first day that the negotiating teams met with the mediator, there was no progress. Then a second meeting was scheduled with the mediator for about another month or so later. We thought, okay, the board has already hired somebody that's going to help them fight back against us. This is not going well. We can see we're headed for a fight. We're headed for an eventual strike. but we already had the second day of mediation scheduled. Well, the negotiating teams, we started negotiating at 9 in the morning. The mediator was going back and forth between the teams. They finished at 1 o'clock at night. It was a marathon 16-hour negotiating session. We were all surprised. The fact that it was going so long was a good sign that something was happening. And the next day, or actually at like 1:05 in the morning, we started getting texts from the negotiating team saying we have a deal. And thank goodness, because if we hadn't, probably there would have been no third mediation session. And we
Last
probably
time
would
the
have.
strike happened was 2006.
That's right, there was a strike in 2006, so.
I
thank
remember hearing
goodness.
about it on the news.
Really? Okay. So. All right, I think I covered everything there.
I think it was in the fall of '06, or maybe it was around this time.
Yeah, I'm not sure. All right, there was a change to the law. There was a ruling by the Supreme Court. We see here Sam Alito and Elena Kagan, two of the justices on the Supreme Court. This was back in 2018, where a case came before the court, and the question was, if you are a government employee and you work someplace where there's a union representing your job, do you have to join the union? Do you have to pay your union dues? And the Supreme Court made a ruling that you do not. And that's why, as a faculty member here at Hartnell, a faculty member can get the benefits of being a union member and not pay their union dues and not actually be a member. So that law, that ruling of the law weakened unions. Any unions for government employees like firefighters, or police officers, or public school teachers have less membership, fewer members, because some of them are going to say, well, I don't want to pay my dues, and I still get the same benefits. There are also differences in the law from state to state. California is a pro-worker state, so we have a lot of laws that protect workers and protect unions, but in some states, the laws weaken the unions. So depending on where you live in the United States, you might find that if there is a union, you have to join the union to work in that job. That would mean you work in what's called a union shop, where you have no choice. If you take that job, you have to join the union, you have to pay your dues. You might find you're in a situation where it's called an agency shop, where you don't have to be a union member, but you have to pay the dues. So it's your choice if you want to be a member, but either way, you got to pay. Or it might be an open shop where you don't have to join the union, you don't have to pay your dues. Okay, so those laws change from state to state. By the way, you might hear this term right to work. Right to work sounds like a good thing, but really what it means, if you're in a right to work state, you have the right to work in that job and not join the union. So right to work is really an anti-union law. Just keep that in mind. Okay, if you are part of a union and there's something you're not happy with, maybe you feel like you're being harassed at work, or you're not being treated fairly by your supervisor, whatever it might be, you can make your complaint to the union steward. Hey, this person is at your facility and they are part of the union. They will take it up with your boss and try to get it resolved. And if they cannot resolve it at that level, it then goes up to the next level at the union and the next level at your company. If they can't resolve it, it goes up another level, and it might eventually go into arbitration. I don't think we've talked about arbitration, have we? Arbitration is kind of like court, but it's not as expensive and it's faster. Basically, the arbitrator comes in, hears both sides, makes a ruling, and that's the end of it. But you don't want to go through that process. Okay.
What would happen if you guys were to go on strike and the semester started and it's just like, did they just?
Yeah, that almost happened at the Cal State, the entire Cal State system, CSUMB and all of the other Cal State campuses. The faculty members did go on strike for the first day of the semester, and they were going to stay on strike. But the chancellor's office for the Cal State system, relented and agreed to a tentative agreement. So, yeah, they had to cancel classes. It was major disruption. Fortunately, it only lasted one day.
The students get refunded or like extended amount of time?
That's a good question. They should, right? But the college or university might fight back and say, no, we switched to online, or we brought in replacement instructors or something like that. So it sort of depends on the situation, yeah. But it definitely wouldn't be good for students. All right, so this is the grievance procedure. Now, if it goes further, again, the union can call a strike in an extreme situation, and then the workers don't come to work. You could also boycott the company and say, we're not going to buy your product, and we're going to tell other people not to buy your product. Usually not that effective of a strategy, but that is something that the union could do. You could picket. Picket is when you go out with the signs, right? A lot of people assume that if you see a picket sign, that means that they're on strike, but not necessarily. You could also, if it's a corporation, you could go to their annual shareholder meeting and try to put pressure on the investors, to pressure the board to make a deal with the union. So those are some things the union can do to try to put pressure on the company. What can the company do? It could do a lockout. It could say to the workers, oh, just don't come to work. We don't want you here. It could say, we're bringing in other workers to replace you. In some situations, that's illegal, but sometimes they get away with it. I'm not really sure the law on that. They could work with other companies in their industry, because if, let's say, Taylor Farms, sorry, I knew that was wrong. Taylor Farms, if their workers went on strike, you can imagine a lot of the other ag companies around here would be worried that their workers would go on strike too, right? So they would probably donate some money to help Taylor Farms fight back, to help discourage their own workers from trying the same thing. So that would be called a mutual aid pact. Or in an extreme case, the employer might shift production. Walmart famously did this because Walmart is anti-union. They do not want their workers to join unions. Why do you think that is? What would happen if Walmart workers became union members?
A lot of lawsuits.
There would be a lot of lawsuits, but what would be their main thing that they'd probably be asking for?
Better pay.
Better pay, exactly. And Walmart would have to negotiate with the union and probably end up paying more, which means they'd have to raise their prices or lose some profits, right? And they don't want to do either. So what Walmart has famously done in a case where some of its workers were starting to organize and join a union, Walmart just shut down that facility and said, okay, we're just not going to do business in that town.
Oh, so the Walmart, which city?
I don't know what city that was. That's a good question.
It was in California.
You know, I can't say for sure. That's a good question, Eric. Yeah.
I'll have to look it up on that.
But that is something that companies might do. They might just shift their production and say, no, we're just not going to operate this factory anymore. We're going to open up a factory in Mexico instead. And then, we don't have to pay union wages in the United States. So, all right, now this graph, I know it's really hard to look at, okay? But it's got some interesting information. So let me just kind of walk you through it. As I mentioned, 1935, FDR signed the National Labor Relations Act that strengthened unions. So you can see this red line is union membership, shot up, and it reached a peak here around 1980 when Reagan was in office. Now look at the blue line. The blue line is the income of the 1% of the richest Americans, the top 1% of Americans. Their income is highest when union membership is lowest. And look, as union membership goes up, the income of the wealthiest Americans goes down. Relationship. No wonder big corporations fight back against the unions, right? Because it costs them money. It digs into their profits. And then when Reagan came into office, there was a famous situation where the air traffic controllers were on strike. He replaced them. He said, okay, just bring in replacements. Which sent a message that if you go on strike, your rights might not be protected, your job might not be protected, and you might just get replaced. And so it really caused a decline in union membership after that. You see how union membership went down. What happened to the wealthiest Americans? Their incomes went up. Interesting, right? So I think we can safely say that unions, love them or hate them, because they're not perfect. There have been unions that were tied to organized crime. There are unions that don't do a good job of representing their employees. There are a lot of problems, okay? But whatever you feel about unions, I think it's pretty clear when unions are strongest, the American middle class is strongest, and our democracy is strongest. So I think there is a place for unions. In fact, again, it is our right in most hourly jobs to join the union if we want to. Let's look at some laws related to employment, not just unions. Let me just see, does anyone have any questions or comments before we get into labor laws? Doing on time, we got about 10 minutes left, so no, okay. So also in 1935, FDR signed the Social Security Act that created Social Security, which most Americans feel is a really good program. Again, the Wagner Act is the National Labor Relations Act that strengthened the unions. I'm going to skip some of these. The Equal Pay Act. Who can tell me, what was that supposed to do? Exactly. The Equal Pay Act is supposed to make sure women get paid the same as men if they're doing the same job, right? And we're not there yet. Even though that law has been on the books for 60 years, women are still paid, I think it's around 80% of what men make for the same job. So it's gotten better, but it's still not where it should be. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed to end segregation and discrimination. Of course, we still have segregation and discrimination in our society, but we have made some improvement there. The Age Discrimination Act protects workers who are 40 or older from being discriminated based on their age. OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Act, is supposed to make sure we have safe working places. Then there's a Vietnam Veteran Readjustment Act. Oh, here we see, this is FDR signing the Wagner Act in 1935.
The day after Independence Day.
You're right, the day after Independence Day. Good catch there. Okay. Then there's ERISA. This law protects your retirement fund at work so that your employer can't just like spend your retirement money. There is a Pregnancy Discrimination Act. It's not legal to discriminate against a woman because she's pregnant or because she could become pregnant. Americans with Disabilities Act. you have to make sure that you're not discriminating against people with disabilities, whether it's emotional, learning disabilities, physical disabilities. You have to provide reasonable accommodations for those folks. So if you've got somebody, for example, that maybe they need a larger monitor so they can see it well, that's reasonable. You need to be able to provide that. If you've got an employee that, maybe what they need to do the job is not considered reasonable because it would cost $100,000, then maybe you don't have to provide it. So the law does provide some exception there. Okay, the last slide before we get to our matching activity. Now, diversity in the workplace provides differing perspectives, differing talents, differing experiences. Diversity can make, and when I say diversity, talking about all kinds, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, diversity of political perspectives, any kind of diversity you could think of can make an organization stronger as long as people feel welcome. As long as they feel accepted and valued, then that diversity has shown to be a good thing. Let's just take a moment, look at this picture here, and tell me how you would describe this group. Any idea where these folks might be from, who they might be? Okay, they do look Middle Eastern, right? The headdresses that they're wearing look Middle Eastern. I think that's a good guess. Why else do you say Middle East? Anything else?
I don't know.
You could say they're,
Isn't it called a turban or? They're called?
yeah, I can't tell you exactly. I think turbans are more like
Yeah.
up here. There is a name. What is it?
We call it Chima or Utra.
Okay.
Thank you.
What she said. Thank you, Iman. Their skin tone is a little, I'd say, on the brown side. Could also suggest, that they're not Anglos, for example. Most of them have beards. They look kind of tough. Might even look like terrorists. Anyone want to guess who these actually are? Because obviously it's not who they look like.
I think they're
They are workers.
probably from
usually.
Iraq.
Probably from Iraq. Good guess. What would you say? Would you believe this is a group of American astronauts, including John Glenn and Alan Shepard, I think?
Howard Shepherd.
Here's sorry. Make it bigger. Okay. See this gentleman in the middle? Alan Shepard. That's what he looks like on a postage stamp. Same guy. That picture was from a training mission where they were dropped off and had to survive for several days. They had to cut up their parachutes to make headdresses to protect themselves from the sun. And that's what they look like after a couple days of survival. And the point is that how somebody appears does not tell you who they really are, right?
Okay.
These are very well accomplished, capable people, even if they look like a scary bunch of hooligans. But they're not. All right. So companies, when they hire people, they need to try to hire not only somebody that can do the job and fit into the organization as a whole, but also, is it someone that can bring some diverse perspectives? And can they add some value to the organization? One last point here before the matching activity. We've lost a lot of manufacturing in this country. A lot of it has gone to other countries. However, we have a lot of service companies, so there's a lot of opportunity for unions to recruit people in service industries and strengthen our unions. All right, we have only a couple minutes left. Hang in there with me. We've got 4 minutes. To save us a little time, I'm just gonna, let's see how much of this we can get through. Looking at these images, do you see one that seems to relate to human resource management? Bottom left? Okay, yeah. All the different aspects we've been talking about human resource management. How about recruiting? Anything here?
Tell me this one.
Which one are you pointing at there, Eric? This one?
Yeah.
Okay, it says recruitment, networking, career. Yep, I would say that's a good match. How about selecting qualified applicants? Bottom middle, yeah, okay, you got, it looks like an interview that could be going on, some conversation about, are you a good applicant? Training and development.
Maybe the one to the left with like the robots.
Okay, this could be, yeah, maybe she's training the robot or the robot's training her, could be. What else? Performance appraisals, evaluating employee performance.
I say I think the green square at the bottom right.
Okay, so this, it outlines, I know it's a little hard to see, some of the different laws related to employment, and of course, some of them are gonna relate to how you evaluate your employees, and if you're doing it legally. How about compensation methods? How you pay your employees?
Top right.
Top right, okay, we see you got money, other kinds of rewards and benefits. Then we have labor unions. Middle one? Okay, we see some strikers or picketers at least, okay, so it looks like they're union members. Grievances between management and labor. Complaints. Yes, sir. This one here?
Yeah.
All right, yeah, looks like there's some, maybe it's the employees evaluating their employer and having some grievances. We've got laws and federal agencies. As I mentioned, we do see some of the different laws listed here. Let's see what we didn't cover. Here we've got, thanks to the labor movement, all of these things. One benefit of unions is that even other companies that are not dealing with unions, they provide better pay to keep the unions out. So even non-union workers get benefits from unions. Let's see, we've got training versus development up here. I think we covered all of them. There we go. All right, everybody, we're done. Have a good week. See you Tuesday.